Alright, hello and welcome ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. My name is Eric and this is the Other CEDH. We're your one-stop shop for all things casual, kitchen, table, magic, the gathering. Thank you for joining me here today. And it is time for us to take a look at our very first deck tech. We're going to be breaking down Marwyn the Nurturer in this deck tech today. This is going to be a really good beginner's build. It's a pretty easy build to put together. It's not going to cost you a lot of money to put together. I have had quite a bit of success with it. This is nothing really fancy. It's basically just mono green stomp, but that is a lot of fun to play. And I think if you put this together and try it out, you're gonna have a lot of fun with it. It's a fun build. Elf Ball is really fast and the deck plays very brisk, and it's quite a bit of fun. So hopefully you guys enjoy it as much as I do. 2 and a green for a legendary creature, Elf Druid. She is a 1/1. Says whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Marwyn the Nurturer, and you can tap to add an amount of green mana equal to Marwyn's power. So Marwyn cares about us playing elves. We have a lot of very low cost elves in this deck. Again, this deck plays at a very, very brisk pace. It does put out quite a bit of mana, so you're never going to be stuck having a lot of mana and nothing to do with it. We do have a good amount of card draw in this deck. To me, playing elves is a lot of fun. I always wanted to kind of build an elf tribal or elf ball deck, and Marwyn just seemed like a perfect fit. Another really appealing thing about this build was that Marwyn herself costs less than $1, and a lot of the other cards in this deck are also under $1. There are a couple of cards that are a tad bit on the pricier side depending on what your budget is, but again, this is going to be a deck that's really, really fun and unique, and you don't have to build it as mono green stomp. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to build it as well. So we're going to be looking at 4 main categories with this deck. We're going to be looking at mana ramp, card draw, removal and protection, and more importantly, how are we going to win this game? I feel like that's one of the pitfalls of a lot of early deck building is you put a bunch of cool stuff in your deck and you kind of forget to build in a way to win, but we're going to have no problems winning with this deck at all. Again, it's just going to be mono green, so we're just going to run over everyone. We are also going to talk turkey with this deck. We're going to talk about how much this deck is going to cost in its current iteration, which I have the tapped out deck list I will put in the description below. We're also going to talk about some alternate budget options, how you can really put some money into this deck if you really have the budget to do so, and some alternate build paths that you can look at as well. Again, you don't have to build this as mono green stomp. That's just kind of how I built it, but there are a couple of other options that you can explore. So looking into our mana ramp category, the very first thing that we included is, I mean, come on, we had to. Land of War Elves is a classic. 1 green comes down on turn 1, taps for a green. Even if you wait until after Marwyn's out, he will trigger Marwyn. Marwyn's going to tap for more mana, and you're quickly going to find that mana is not a problem in this deck at all. We're also running Elvish Mystic, which is basically a functional reprint. It's the exact same thing. It's 1 green, comes down, taps for a green. Again, it is an elf. This will trigger Marwyn, so Marwyn will tap for more mana, make her a lot bigger. A lot of these low drop elves, if you can play enough of them in a turn, you can get Marwyn big enough that she can kind of start to swing in for some commander damage, and she can definitely start to make people a little nervous. I've seen her make people nervous before. We're also running Farhaven Elf at 2 and a green. He's a 1/1 elf druid. Whenever he enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, and shuffle your library. You're probably almost going to want to wait until after you got Marwyn out to play this, but again, he'll trigger Marwyn, make Marwyn bigger. You guys are starting to see the pattern here. This deck just pours out mana. And we're also going to be running Wood Elves for 2 and a green. This is a little better in that it will bring that land into the battlefield untapped. It does limit you to a forest. We're only running basic forests aside from a couple of other lands in this deck, so that's not going to be an issue. Once again, an elf. Once again, triggers Marwyn. You guys are starting to get the idea. This gets out of hand fast. I'd also like to take a minute to talk about some of the elf lords that we have in the deck. We're going to be running Dwynen Giltleaf Dan, which I probably just totally butchered the pronunciation on. Somebody can feel free to correct me if that's not right, but I think that I said it correctly. She is 2 and 2 green for a legendary creature, elf warrior. She's a 3/4 with reach, which in this format isn't irrelevant. This is a format where you tend to see a lot of like angels and dragons and big things that just beat in the air. So Dwynen can kind of pull you out of a hairy spot for a turn at least. She does give all your other elf creatures +1/+1, and whenever she attacks, you gain 1 life for each attacking elf you control. Again, if you're in a spot where you've got 7, 8 elves out and you can freely swing with all of them and not lose too many of them, that could be a relevant ability, so she's a really nice include to have in this deck. We're also going to be running Elvish Archdruid, which is 1 and 2 green for a 2/2. Other elf creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can tap this guy to add a green mana for each elf you control. Again, this starts to get gross if you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 elves. You've got Marwyn up to 6, 7, 8 power, and all of a sudden you've got a bajillion mana at your disposal. It's mono green, so if you're having a problem with ramp, I think we've got a problem. We're also going to be running 1 copy of Elvish Clancaller, which is 2 green. Other elves we control get +1/+1. She does have an activated ability that will let us go search for another copy of Elvish Clancaller, but obviously we're in a singleton format, so that is never going to matter. She's basically just in here for that pump to our other elves. And last but not least, we have Imperious Perfect, 2 and a green. Other elf creatures we control get +1/+1, and pay a green, tap it, create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. Again, for 1 green, you can make another elf. It will trigger Marwyn. You guys are probably really getting sick of me hearing about triggering Marwyn, but she really does kind of bring this whole deck together. You don't necessarily need her in the later game in order to win, but she's a really good value engine for you in that she is going to give you enough mana to drop enough things to get you very well set up. And now we're going to move on to our card draw category because we need to keep our hands full. We need to have options available to us. This is a game of resources after all, and cards are one of our biggest resources, so we need to keep our hands full in mono green. This isn't too big of a problem usually because we're going to run things like Shamanic Revelation, 3 and 2 green for a sorcery, draw a card for each creature you control. It does have a ferocious ability that says you gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. There are times in this deck where with the amount of pump effects and things that we have, if you can get this to go off and can get that ferocious ability online, you can gain quite a bit of life in this deck. Green isn't known for the really powerful life gain stupidity that white has been known to run. But again, this is a really good way to kind of bring you back into the fight if you've been hit a few too many times and refill your hand. This is a really, really good card to have. We also have a Collective Unconscious for 4 and 2 green. Draw a card for each creature you control. It's a little expensive, but again, with the amount of mana that this deck can pour out, it's not going to be too hard to get this to go off. And again, if you've got 7, 8, 9, maybe even more elves out, you're going to refill your hand quite nicely, and you're going to be in a very, very good spot. And probably the sickest piece of card draw in this entire deck is Regal Force. It's 4 and 3 green for a 5/5 body. It is a little expensive mana-wise, but when he enters the battlefield, draw a card for each green creature you control. This is especially sick because there are a couple of ways in this deck to bounce him back to your hand and kind of recur him from the... I don't remember if there's any way to recur him from the graveyard, but if you can repeatedly play this guy somehow and you've got, again, 8, 9 elves on the battlefield, you are going to have a sick amount of cards in hand. And now moving on to our protection and removal package. Yes, I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to Lignify you. Lignify is 1 and a green for a tribal enchantment, Treefolk Aura. Enchant creature says enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a Treefolk with base power and toughness 0/4. I have had this done to me before. It feels really bad. This is one of those things that you deploy on somebody's commander when they're relying on their commander to combo off. You can slap this on like an Animar when Animar's like a 34/34 and somebody's about to just draw through their whole deck or about to drop their ancestral statue and just kill you. Again, this will at least buy you a turn or two because they have to figure out how to get rid of the Lignify or get rid of their commander, send it back to the command zone somehow. And you've slowed them down enough that you can kind of buy yourself some time to get yourself a little better set up. Lignify is a really solid piece of removal in this deck. I highly recommend putting in a copy of it. We're also going to be running Alpha Authority, which is 1 and a green enchant creature. Enchanted creature has hexproof and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. If you can get Marwyn big enough and give her trample somehow, you'd be surprised at how hard this makes Marwyn to deal with. Again, this will shut off spot removal for at least a little while. Nobody can really Chaos Warp her or do anything like that. And again, can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. Again, you can kind of use her if you've gotten her big enough to swing in for some commander damage. She is definitely one of the win conditions in this deck. Again, you don't need her in order to win, but it is pretty handy to be able to protect her, especially if you need that mana to get better set up and to kind of get your win conditions online. We're also running things like Aspect of Mongoose, which is 1 in a green for an enchant creature. Enchanted creature can be the target of spells or abilities, and when Aspect of Mongoose is put into a graveyard from play, return Aspect of Mongoose to its owner's hand. I've had this out a number of different times with this deck, and this gets annoying fast. Because essentially the only way that somebody can get rid of this is to use their Anguished Unmaking, their Utter End, their Scour from Existence, which I really highly doubt somebody's going to want to spend 7 mana and their 1 copy of Scour from Existence to get rid of your 1 and a green enchantment. And even if they manage to kill Marwyn, somehow somebody board wipes, this goes to your graveyard, just comes right back to your hand. With the amount of mana you got, you just recast Marwyn, slap this back on her, and you are going to be good to go. We're also running a copy of Nature's Way, which is 1 in a green for a sorcery. Target creature you control gains Vigilance and Trample till end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. This is a really good way if you've got Marwyn big enough to help you deal with something like an Elder Dragon or some kind of big monstrosity that you can't normally block and kill. You can get Marwyn up to about 8-9 power, and it will be enough to take care of a lot of commanders a lot of the time. Again, this isn't going to work for something like an Animar when he's sitting at like a 34, because I have an Animar deck. I've seen Animar get that big. But most of the time, if nobody's done anything too crazy with their commander and you've got Marwyn big enough, you can just kind of smash into somebody's commander and can get rid of it for a couple of turns and buy yourself some time that way. This is a really good include in this deck. Alright, now I've also included some fog effects in this deck because that is what works well for my meta. I'm in a very creature-heavy meta that relies on combat a lot of the time in order to win the game. So I've included some of these fog effects. You can feel free to take these out and replace them with whatever you feel like would be better for your meta. You can add in some other enchantments or equipment, or you can run in more instants and sorceries that aren't fogs, things like that. However you guys want to go about doing this, these are just fog effects that I've included because they work well for me. They have saved me and actually gotten me into a pretty good spot a few different times. So we're running things like Winds of Calcisma, 1 in a green, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Also has a ferocious ability, says if you control a creature of power 4 or greater, instead prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures your opponents control. So this is a good way to kind of save your own board and fog everybody out. A lot of these fog effects are very cheap, so they're very easy to hold up enough mana to get these to go off, especially if you have a feeling somebody's just going to be able to kill you in one shot. We're also running Commencement of Festivities, which is almost the same thing, 1 in a green for an instant, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt 2 players this turn. So somebody attacks and you don't block, you just use this, fog everybody out for a turn. And then we're also running just the classic fog for 1 green. It's an instant, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. We tried to have a few different of these in the deck, and these were the cheapest routes to go, so that's what we included. As far as removal, we're running things like Reclamation Sage, which is 2 in a green. It is an elf shaman, so it will trigger Marwyn. It says when Reclamation Sage enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. I don't know of any green deck that doesn't just automatically run Reclamation Sage. It's just a really solid piece of removal. You can drop this and get rid of somebody's Dismiss into Dream. Shout out to my buddy Dan. That enchantment has hosed so many of our games before. But yeah, this was a really easy include for us. We're also going to be running things like Desert Twister, which is 4 and 2 green for a sorcery. It is a bit expensive, but it just says destroy target permanent, so you can point this at pretty much anything that's giving you a headache, and this will get rid of it. Especially if somebody's got something like a Torpor Orb and Reclamation Sage won't take care of it. This will definitely take care of it. Again, shout out to my buddy Dan. Torpor Orb has, again, hosed so many of our games. Yeah, this is just a really, really solid piece of removal in this deck. Alright, so now on to our last category. How are we going to win this game? We're in mono green, so it's no surprise that we're running things like Overrun and Overwhelming Stampede. Overrun is 2 and 3 green. Creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. Overwhelming Stampede is 3 and 2 green for a sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Now, it is not uncommon in this deck, if you have both of these in hand, you are probably going to have enough mana to fire both of these off in the same turn. And if you can get everybody up to, say, +9/+9 or +10/+10 and trample, it's going to be really hard for you not to just close out the game right then and there. Even if you can't close out the game with those two, if the board is in a state where you can't kill everyone, you are going to cripple everyone to the point where they're within range of getting finished off by somebody else. Or if nobody manages to board wipe you, you can probably just finish them off the next turn. So you're just going to be swinging in for a ton of damage again. We're in mono green. This isn't anything fancy. That's why we've also included a copy of Vitalizing Wind. It is a bit expensive to cast at 8 and a green, but you can do this at instant speed. Creatures you control get +7/+7 until end of turn. You'll want to hang this open for when somebody's maybe still got a couple of blockers. It's just you and somebody else left. You go to declare your attacks. They declare their blockers. They think you're only getting in for 6 or 7 damage between two creatures. Now all of a sudden you're getting in for 14, 15, 16 damage. Now all of a sudden they're dead because the game has gone on long enough. This is, again, you're not going to have enough. You're not going to have a problem having enough mana to get this out and be able to use it to just end the game right then and there. We're also going to be running a copy of Dragon Throne of Tarkir, which I believe is just criminally underplayed. It's a legendary artifact equipment. Dragon Throne of Tarkir is 4 mana. Says equipped creature has Defender and 2-tap. Other creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is this creature's power. So this is basically an overwhelming stampede on an equipment. The only bad thing about this is in order to cast it, equip it, and deploy it, it's going to cost you 9 mana total. I don't know how many times I've said before that mana is not going to be a problem in this deck, so that shouldn't be too unrealistic for you to do. You definitely don't want to drop this and not be able to equip it and use it in the same turn, because people are going to see it, they're going to know what it does, and you're going to pretty much paint a target on yourself because you're going to say, hey, this person's about to win next turn, because they're just going to make everything huge and run over all of us. So, but if you can get it all to go down in one shot, this is kind of like overwhelming stampede. Somebody's game is going to end right then and there. And yes, I'm going to be that guy. Now, I included this in the win conditions category. I've never actually won a game with it before, but this is going to end the game for someone. It's Triumph of the Hordes. It's 2 and 2 green for a sorcery. Until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and infect. Now, yes, I am that guy, and yes, I will play infect, and I will tell you why. Because there are going to be times where there's one person at the table that you cannot deal with. Somebody running some kind of Fire Song and Sunspeaker or some kind of Orzhov life gain stupidity, or suddenly they're at 585 life. Infect doesn't care if you're at 585 life. If you take 10 Infect, you are dead. So this is a really good way to close out the game for that problem player. The only problem with this is if you're not using this to just end all 3 people at once, you're going to paint a huge target on yourself because the rest of the table doesn't know how much Infect you have. This is the only piece of Infect that we're running in this deck. The only way that I'm thinking you can take one person out and not paint a target on yourself is if you kind of assure the table that, hey, this person needs to be dealt with. I've got a good way to end the game for this person. There's no more Infect in this deck. I have to use this, and you can maybe kind of try and politic your way out of the situation that way. I wouldn't count on it working, but you never know. Stranger things have happened. But yeah, this is a good way to end the game for one person, if not everyone. So now that we're done with all of that, let's talk turkey. How much is this deck going to cost you to put together? The list in its current iteration, going by Card Kingdom lowest near mint price, is $57.49, which is not that bad at all. Again, this is a fairly good beginner's budget build. It's not as budget as some of the other builds out there, but $50 is really pretty reasonable to put this deck together. The 2 most expensive cards that we're running in the entire deck are Triumph of the Hordes and Growing Rights of Itlamok. So if you wanted to save a little bit of money, you could cut those 2 cards. The cost to cut those 2 cards is going to be roughly $21. So again, if you want to save a little bit of money, you could make some cuts there. Growing Rights of Itlamok is in around $10. I think it might be a little more than $10. I just happen to have a copy of it laying around, so I threw it in this deck. I mean, it's just more ramp. You really don't need any more ramp, especially with the amount that this deck has. Triumph of the Hordes, again, is a really nice finisher, and I always like throwing some Infect in just as kind of a surprise, especially to a group that I've never played with before. If you feel like you're going to get hated out of a table for playing Infect, you can feel free to cut that as well. So now let's look at some alternate build paths and upgrades. A really obvious upgrade to this deck would be Craterhoof Behemoth. This goes in pretty much any green deck. 5 and 3 green for a 5/5 with haste. When Craterhoof Behemoth enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. When the entire deck costs you around $50 to put together, to me it didn't really seem worth it to throw in a copy of Craterhoof Behemoth for $30, which I think is what it's still sitting at. If you guys have a copy of it laying around, feel free to throw it in here. This is going to be an awesome finisher. Craterhoof is awesome in any green deck that you can put it in. It's just a really, really solid upgrade if you guys have the money for it. Another really super solid upgrade is Gaia's Cradle. Again, not everybody has one laying around, and not everyone has the $300+ to drop on one. I think that's what they're still sitting at on the low end. So again, this is just one of those things. It's more ramp. We are running Growing Rights of Itlamok. This is harder to get rid of. Growing Rights of Itlamok basically does the same thing. There's a small window of opportunity where your opponents can get rid of it. But again, if you have one laying around or you have the budget, you got money to burn, go ahead and throw it in here. Being in mono green, you don't really have a whole lot of combo potential. I did run across a couple of things while I was doing research for this deck, and I don't know how I didn't find out about this before, but I came across a card called Umbral Mantle. Umbral Mantle is an equipment. It says equipped creature has 3 untapped. This creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. It equips for 0. Essentially what this means is if there's ever a point where you can get Marwyn to tap for 3 mana, you can untap her to give her +2/+2, then tap her for 5 mana, use 3 of it to untap, and essentially you just make infinite green mana. And then with infinite green mana, if you're going to go that route, you're obviously going to want to include some ways to abuse that infinite green mana. So, and even if you could just use that green mana to dump out everything in your hand. You could abuse this with something like Helix Pinnacle, which is 1 green for an enchantment with Shroud. It says pay X, put X tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, you win the game. I don't know how you guys feel about you win the game cards. To me, I think they're really funny and cheeky and goofy if you can get them to stick. This enchantment does have Shroud, so it's going to be fairly difficult for your opponents to get rid of in one rotation of the table, especially if you're already set up with infinite green mana. Somebody could drop something like a Bane of Progress or a Nev's Disc or something like that and get rid of it that way. But odds are fairly good that if you can drop this and get the number of tower counters on it with your infinite green mana, it's going to come back around to your upkeep and you're just going to win. Another way you can improve this deck is with your creature tutors, so you can put in something like Survival of the Fittest, which is an enchantment for 1 and a green. Says, pay a green, choose and discard a creature card, search your library for a creature card, reveal that card to all players, put it in your hand, shuffle your library afterwards. This would be something that you could use to discard like your Land of War Elves and go get your Crater Hoof Behemoth, or do something like that and you could win that way. Survival of the Fittest is still a fair bit expensive. I think if you wanted to go a much cheaper route, you could throw in things like Primal Command, which is 3 and 2 green. Choose 2, target player gains 7 life, put target non-creature permanent on top of its owner's library. Target player shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library and search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. This is one of those, all the command cards are really flexible. Primal Command is especially good. You're almost always just going to be using it for that creature tutor. The other mode's usually not going to matter all that much. You can gain 7 life, you can bounce something that's a problem for you. Somebody's milling you out, you can shuffle your graveyard back and hope to get back into some of your key pieces, but again, you're just running it for that creature tutor. And now we're going to be looking at the mana base. We are running 1 copy of Mosswort Bridge, which is a hideaway land. It comes into play tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile 1 face down, then put the rest on the bottom of your library. It taps for a green, and you can pay a green, tap it. You may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater. So this is really handy. You could tuck something like your Overrun, your Overwhelming Stampede. You can maybe even tuck your copy of Triumph of the Hordes under this. And then getting to creatures that have total power of 10 or greater in this deck is not going to be that difficult at all. We're also going to be running a copy of Rogue's Passage, which taps for a colorless, or you can pay 4, tap it, target creature can't be blocked this turn. This is a good way to get Marwyn in for that unblockable commander damage and try and close the game out that way. This was just a really, really solid include in this deck. And as far as the rest of the mana base, we're going to be running 35 basic forests, and that is going to be it. So that was our deck tech for Marwyn the Nurturer. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully this is going to be a build that you guys decide that you want to look into and can maybe tweak and mess with it a little bit. If you guys enjoy what we're doing on this channel, feel free to subscribe and smash that like button. We're really new to doing this. We did go through some technical issues in trying to get this deck tech uploaded. Hopefully we've got everything fixed now. I apologize to you guys. This is something that we're still pretty new at. We didn't really know what we were doing. We kind of rushed into things, which was probably not the way to do it. Again, I do apologize. I don't want that to be the first impression that you guys have of us and this channel. But for now, that is the end of this deck tag. My name is Eric. This has been the Other CEDH, and thank you so much for joining me. We will see you guys later.